everything that we experience comes from pure subjectivity. And again, we are mostly sure that whatever we experience, it is we who experience it. Or better still, it is I who experience it. Each and every one of you have that very clear knowledge that everything that you experienced, doesn't matter, experiencing, happened to you, not to someone else. Even in a deep sleep, when that individuality is dissolved, when we're taking rest, we know that it is I who had a deep sleep. It is I who had no dreams. You didn't become your neighbor, nor your partner next to you. It was very clear. It's a subjective experience. You come out of that, how did you sleep? Slept very well. Didn't have one dream, just blanked out. Are you sure? Positive. How can you be so sure? Well, I'm sorry, don't be ridiculous. But how can you be so sure? Unless we are able to examine this, we will never understand the root of our individuality. How can we know anything if not for subjectivity of experience? Even when someone undergoes through the frenzy, through the wilderness of spiritual breakthroughs, spiritual experiences, no matter how phantasmagoric, amazing, esoteric, metaphysical they are, they always come back into this body to tell the stories. No? I was one with the universe. All there was this love, universe, and there was no me. It was all love and peace and God and all this shimmering pool of light, and I was one with it all, and there was no me. And how do you know it happened to you? Are you sure? That's why science doesn't buy this. You see? This is why spirituality is still kind of, it's too subjective. I'm sorry, how can we possibly study this phenomena? How can I be sure that someone is not hallucinating? But New Age books are full of these encounters and accounts. Because there's always someone who tells the story. There's always someone who tells that happened to me. I was that one who had that experience of union. Because if this identity was totally dissolved in that experience of union, there will be no one to tell the story. Who will tell the story? Of course, we can be poetic. The breeze, the morning breeze, and the dew, and the moonlight, and the lotus bloom. No, there is a book on a shelf, and it has an author. It was I who went through this. don't lose your attention. It is very important. Important simply because tapping into this is to understand the root of your individuality, is to understand the predicament. From so many perspectives, this is seen as a predicament, the greatest predicaments of consciousness being in the body, with all its limitations, with all that brings about. Where does it come from? How can there be any sense of identity if the only real here is transcendence? And transcendence is not yours or mine. Transcendence is just that, mass of consciousness. Where all this multiplicity come from? And yet, amidst of all of that, right now, each and every one of you has that as the central idea, as the central vibration, as the very axis is that centrality of your experience. This is the universal identity. This same universal identity is what instructs you when you come out of the deep sleep that it is indeed you who slept well. The same way when you plunge yourself in a pool of cold water or had a hot shower, a strawberry or an argument, it is you who are going through this experience. The only constant thing is this: I am. The only constant is that I am. The centrality of experience. All experiences are, with no exception, belong to the subjectivity of consciousness. Pure subjectivity. This is universal identity. Or if you want, Kashmir Shaivism calls it universal egoity. And this is when it gets tricky. We can speak about the anatomy, the spiritual anatomy, and all the structure. But to understand the root of our individuality and to dismiss it just as that ego principle is to undermine and overlook the complexity which is nothing short of uniqueness of self expressing itself through the myriad of forms and phenomena. And that is checked by the universal principle of individuation, Ahamkara. This is where you lay aside the battle with the ego forever. You no longer battle where there is no need for fight. Because instantaneous and sudden glimpse, a flash of intuition that there is nothing other than centrality of your own self. Everything is illumined by that self. And there is no other experiencer. This is where, scripturally speaking, the self from the lowercase stands exposed, flushed out by the self from the capital S. The self exposes non-existence of non-self. Through very clear observation that every experience belongs to pure subjectivity of your own self and nothing else. That's what it means. Remember, you've never existed unless as a ripple, spitting and splashing in your own glory, forgetful in motion, that you are but the waters. Fine. With all that being said, of course, there are expositions on locating where that Ahamkara fits in. And universally speaking, when we look at it from, let's say, from the perspective of Indian philosophy, if we stick with the subject, then we have this universal principle, this universal intelligence. You can write that or you don't have to, but in Sanskrit is known as Mahat. It's universal mind, if you will, universal intelligence. Mahat. It's like what the Buddhists call one big mind, one mind. Soon as there is a direction towards individuation, which is the property of Ahamkara, and that Ahamkara is getting infused with intellect, that gives birth to the mind. That's what gives birth to manas. That's why when we speak from the perspective of our individuality, our mind is inseparable from our ego. It's inseparable from that structure of individuality. And now you can understand also why there are so many perspectives that mind not to be trusted. So many spiritual teachers would remind you that mind is not to be trusted. Because mind is already a contracted frequency. It lost its universality.
It's sattvic in nature.
So this is, if you will, two perspectives simultaneously laid aside. Pure subjectivity as universal egoity and the principle of Ahamkara as that universal principle responsible for individuation. What does it mean? It means that all versatility and all multiplicity has Ahamkara behind it. It's literally what empowers our individuality. A well-developed Ahamkara is a well-developed individual. If Ahamkara is not well developed, if there are some weaknesses in Ahamkara, it will backfire in various dysfunctioning forms as egotism, selfishness, lack of altruism, lack of empathy, and so forth. So we can see here that we cannot just deny the existence of ego. We should see this, that Ahamkara itself is a health universal principle, which is the expression of individuation. It's as it were, sometimes I like to say it this way, that it's as if consciousness wants to behold itself through as many eyes as possible. And we know there is no limit to the possibility within consciousness. So it beholds itself through the infinite points of view. But without that principle of Ahamkara, it would not be possible. Everything will be just that, undifferentiated mass of awareness.